So you heard us talking about RFK Jr. being the head of HHS. What do you think about that?
RFK Jr. ate some pork and now he has a brainworm. Is he the person that should be in charge of that?
Real issue here, which is you want to insult the man. Look,
RFK Jr. is a nut.
All right, guys, you won't believe this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s possible appointment as the head of Health and Human Services has set off a firestorm of debate. Now, you got Mayor Adams jumping into the ring, taking on critics from, The View. They're questioning RFK Jr.'s qualifications and really going for the jugular on his health policy views. But yeah, Adams isn't backing down. He fiercely defends RFK Jr., calling out what he insists are legitimate concerns over health policies that are, overlooked. It gets heated, and the real drama lies in the fiery exchange about vaccine regulation and food safety. Now, guys, if you're fired up about this kind of content, I mean, really, who's not? Then hit that subscribe button, all right? It seriously helps me out, keeps the channel going, and I'm aiming for 1,000 subscribers by the end of January, so let's make it happen, yeah? All right, guys, moving on. The discussion heats up around the idea of kind of vaccine accountability, especially when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is up for the post of heading Health and Human Services. This really is a huge talking point, one that, just doesn't seem to lose steam.
Shouldn't he have a background at least? He should have some kind of background in this type of thing.
Let me just... Yeah. Okay, so, Mayor, when Trump returns to office, he will actually have a lot of power with the Republican-controlled Senate and House. He's suggested at times using the National Guard to target the enemy within, and key members of his last administration called him a fascist. But you've defended him. Can you explain?
No, I defended the rhetoric that we're using across our country and what our children are listening to and what we're doing. We've reached a point in this country where we no longer want to engage in conversation. They were even calling him Hitler. That's an insult.
That was only his vice president.
That was an insult. That was an insult to the millions of Jews and others who died. We know what Hitler did. Mm-hmm. And what I said to our country, when I'm on the streets talking to my young people who are protesting on college campuses, wearing Hamas signs and calling for the destructions of groups, I said we have to bring down this rhetoric. We have to start engaging in conversation. Obama said it right, and I agree. This is not the divided state. This is the United States. We're the greatest country on the globe, and people are watching us and name calling.
But do you think Trump should have brought down the rhetoric? Because
everybody should.
Well,
The entire debate centers on whether or not our current health policies are failing us. You've probably heard how Kennedy has been portrayed as a vaccine denier by some. But if you listen to his side of the story, he's calling for vaccines to actually be held to the same rigorous standards as pretty much every other drug out there. Now, that sounds reasonable, right? But apparently his critics, some of whom have really powerful platforms, are twisting the narrative to paint him as a health risk. The irony, they say he's dangerous and irresponsible, yet all he's actually advocating for is, transparency and accountability. Who wouldn't want that when it might involve essentially what goes into our bodies?
If we're being intellectually honest, there's really no good reason why Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr., should be HHS secretary. An advisor, a confidant, somebody who talks to the president and advises, but there's no managerial experience in his resume. There's nothing that says he is qualified to do this job that is in charge of the health of all of us, all these different lanes. If he has views and has insights around food sources, around vaccines, then those should be given an advisory role.
Well, the debate gets even messier when you start hearing from political commentators who seem to have other interests in mind.
Let's understand this also. In all of these agencies, there are thousands of employees and experts that understand these topics, and there are rules, there are regulations.
Mayor, a lot of them want to resign. When they see some of the people that are going to be on top, I think there's going to be a mass exodus of people who have the institutional knowledge and the institutional memory and DOD at HHS. Who wants to work under our cook?
And let me respond to that. If we love our country, then no one individual should take us away from our mission.
Yes.
If you dedicated your life to a particular place, I dedicated my life to law enforcement. So if a new commissioner came in that I disagreed with, I was not going to say, I'm going to resign. Let's love the country. Let's love our cities. Let's get away from the rhetoric of the professionalism that we know. Those are experts in this. They're going to look at his proposal, do a real analysis, and make these decisions. It happens every day.
As if the stakes weren't high enough already, these discussions pull in wider themes around food safety. We're talking about the types of ingredients allowed in our food here in the US, which surprisingly are often banned elsewhere. Do you ever wonder why? These are the tough questions RFK Jr. is willing to ask, and honestly, it's kind of strange that it's such a controversial stance. Shouldn't safer food and stricter vaccine testing be a shared goal? So, some political figures have really gone above and beyond to shout aloud their defenses of RFK Jr., pointing out the glaring failures of current policies.
So you heard us talking about RFK Jr. being the head of HHS. What do you think about that appointment?
The executives will nominate and bring in those who they believe will move their vision forward. And everything from the fluoride issue, I believe we should have fluoride in the water based on what my experts are telling me. But let's be clear, we have a real problem with our food in our country. And we need to watch where we're feeding our children. And
what is the major problem, do you think?
Too much hormones. You know, many people know my, you know, I almost lost my sight with diabetes. The doctor told me I would be blind in a year. I was going to lose my fingers and toes. And it was my food. It wasn't my DNA. It was my dinner.
Mayor Adams, who seems to defy the typical mold by taking a bold stance, speaks out on how RFK Jr.'s critics are more interested in mocking and undermining than discussing real issues. That's why he zeroes in on regulations that just don't seem to be protecting public health the way they should, or maybe could. And here's the thing, like, the more you dig into it, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just about Kennedy's views. It's about highlighting the perceived shortcomings of a system that, some argue, has outright failed communities and families.
The assault on the CDC that lowered the disinformation that led to more than a million deaths, Scott. More than 1 million deaths in the United States, higher than any other industrialized nation per capita. That's the result of failed policies. The demonization of the conspiracy theories.
Whose policies?
All right, under the Trump administration.
Look, there are stories of people facing unexpected health issues, allegedly without accountability or proper application of regulations. As the debate drags on, you get these folks comparing RFK Jr. to some of his loudest critics. You might be surprised to see that a lot of people actually find his approach refreshingly honest, despite what mainstream voices might be saying. And, well, yeah, it's stirring up emotions, both frustration and a sort of hopefulness. Adams argues that if we continue to ignore these health concerns, be it around vaccines or food standards, there's, well, only more trouble ahead. Now, you might wonder, why not many in the public eye seem to be considering this a critical issue? It's like what happens is, as long as someone doesn't dare shake up the status quo too much, the problems are ignored or swept under the rug.
Well, what were the qualifications of the previous ones?
Well, I think it's important to always remember that you put yourself... Say that again?
What were the management qualifications? I mean, Xavier Becerra...
I'm not talking about the previous. I'm looking forward.
But you're calling into question whether he could actually do this job. And I think it's...
Absolutely. I think America is now, and I think
it's important to discuss it because Xavier Becerra was just a lawyer and a politician with no management experience.
So does two wrongs make a right?
Sylvia Burwell was a Walmart lobbyist. Donna Shalala was a university person. Look,
RFK Jr. is a nut.
Okay, so that's different than what you just said. You just said he doesn't possess the requisite managerial experience, but then we get to the real issue here, which is you want to insult the man, which is your right to do because you opposed him in the election. But you, doctor, are raising the issues that he has been raising, and I think they're appropriate questions to raise. I don't know whether he can be confirmed or not. The vaccine stuff at the table is obviously going to be the flashpoint of this hearing. But I'll tell you one thing. This whole issue of the CDC and these public health agencies, look, public trust in the health regime in this country is as low as it's ever been.
But why?
It's because of COVID.
Right.
Because of school closures. Because of mask mandates. Because this country was... But let me just finish. Because this country was drugged through a bunch of condescending and heavy-handed mandates that all turned out to be garbage, and that's why it's low, and the questions are valid.
And RFK is the answer to all of that.
Those brave enough to challenge the norms like Kennedy have to brace themselves for every kind of scrutiny imaginable.
He kind of was going out publicly, contradicting Howard Lutnick and saying, Trump has told me I can get essentially whatever I would like in this administration.
I don't know what you want me to say. I am just at a loss because we're watching something happen in slow motion that is terrifying. You know, the reason we have a great country is because there are pillars in place. There are columns and structures, just like in your house, columns and pillars that you don't see, but they keep things in a good place. They keep things in a good direction. We have healthy children because there are people who've made sure that there are things in place for that. And right now we're seeing termites unleashed on everything. And this is a termite appointment. We know for sure that Bobby Kennedy is a vaccine denier. He's a vaccine denier. He denies being a denier, but he is a denier. and he is going to do great harm. And when you drive down trusted institutions, democracy only works in a high trust environment. When you make everything political, when you make everything negative, when you cast doubts and aspersions, eventually people have to rely on strong men. And so we're in a process right now that's just heartbreaking. And, it turns out that Donald Trump wasn't telling the truth when he said he wasn't for Project 2025. And that guy on your show wasn't telling the truth when he said that Bobby wouldn't get HHS.
The dialogue is more about who's best for the role of addressing these pressing issues rather than being reduced to simple character assassination. The real focus should be on the merits of what's being proposed here, you know? Anyways, it's a hugely important conversation and one that kind of lays bare the differences in how we think about public health. So, yeah, it feels intense, but it's something worth discussing, right? Especially given the vital nature of health in our everyday lives. If you find this debate as engaging or infuriating as I do, make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to know what you all think about RFK Jr.'s views and yeah, this whole appointment drama. Would you welcome change or is the status quo like perfectly fine? Let's chat about it.